Hi, my name is Imbi Neeme and I am the author of The Spill, which won the 2019 Penguin Literary Prize. I'm really thrilled that Brimbank Libraries have asked me to speak to you today about my book and about my journey to publication. Particularly thrilled because I'm a long-term resident of Melbourne's mighty west, currently living in Maribyrnong. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that I live on and that I'm speaking to you from now. They are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and future. I particularly like to do this because telling stories has always been such an integral part of their lives on this land where I now live, where I write and tell my own stories. And I just want to acknowledge what a huge privilege that is. So I'm going to give a presentation now, and then afterwards I'm going to answer some questions that Parthy Raj from Brimbank Libraries has sent through. I've given this presentation lots of times, but I still make lots of mistakes. So I hope you'll forgive me for my errors when I stumble over words or make bold, outright lies. So I'm just sharing now. So once again, with feeling, I am Imbi Neeme and I am the author of The Spill. It's been marketed as my first novel, but it's actually not. My first book was published in 1976. It was published in the school magazine when I was 5 years old. I remember very clearly the pride that I felt when I wrote my first book. I had to wait a few years before I had a bit more wisdom under my belt to look back and realize it wasn't a book, it was a single sentence. But what a sentence. Here it is. The funny planet. One day a man went to a planet and explored it, and a rocket came and a funny turkey came out and asked if he would join in a party in his rocket. Imbi Neeme, year one. I was delighted when I retrieved this story from the archivists at the school that I went to. Because I'd always remembered it as being an alien who came out of the rocket ship and not a funny turkey, and certainly not a funny turkey with a capital T. So I was obviously a very imaginative child, but I just remembered that. So it's actually one of my earliest, clearest memories is how exciting it was to see my story in print. So from a very early age, I was hooked on this idea that I might be a writer. I wrote a lot in my teenage years through journaling and some short stories. This is an actual photo of my actual journals. Precious few survive, which I think we should all be grateful. I'd be mortified if anyone ever read any of these, and we're just going to skip past this slide before you start reading it. Then I went to Japan when I finished university. I got a job teaching English and I lived by myself for 2 years. And I was incredibly lonely, but I spent my evenings feverishly writing an earnest and probably quite terrible novella on a PowerBook 150, very much like this one. I think the novella was, highly derivative. I fancied myself as an Australian Jeanette Winterson, but I wasn't. But my dad read it because he's my dad, and that's the kind of thing dads do. But I remember him saying to me, Imbi, I think you found your bliss. And that really sort of struck a chord with me. I thought, oh, maybe I really will be a writer. Except I then entered my own personal dark ages. So between the ages of 25 and 37, I virtually wrote nothing. I was very busy. I trying to have a career. I got married. I had the same angry baby 3 times in a row. So 3 children. And all that while, I still felt in my heart that I was a writer, even though I was not doing any writing. But the writing did come. So in the wake of one of my children's birthday parties, I was cutting up with a friend, and the friend suggested that I might like to start a blog. I don't know why she suggested that. It might have been because I was clogging up her Facebook feed with my super long posts and she just wanted me to stop. Or maybe she just saw the frustrated writer in me. But, either way, I was glad she made that suggestion because after I'd sort of Googled what is a blog, I opened a WordPress account and started Not Drowning Mothering. I wrote at this blog for 3 or 4 years very actively. I generated over 500 posts. I wrote 270,000 words, and also sort of, you know, gathered around me a very sort of loyal following. But the thing I got most out of the blogging was the discipline that it gave me. I'd get up every morning at 5 o'clock, and I would write as hard as I could before the kids woke up, and then as I was getting them ready for school and kindergarten, I would be revising or thinking about it in my head, and then finally pressing publish just before we left the house. So that discipline and that muscle that it gave me has served me really well in my novel writing, because it just means that if I'm given 15 minutes, I can make the most of that 15 minutes. I go in, and I go in hard. So it was very useful. I eventually broke up with blogging, however, because my heart's desire was really to write books. So in 2013, in a restaurant in Dublin, this very one in the photo, Cornucopia restaurant it's called, I wrote the first paragraph of my first manuscript. It actually took another year before I wrote the second paragraph of my first manuscript, but will give me a bit of a hall pass there. You know, I was obviously just taking my time, easing into it slowly. This photo wasn't taken in 2013. It was actually taken 5 years and 3 manuscripts later, when we were visiting again. And when this photo was taken, I was still 9 months away from finding out that I'd won the Penguin Literary Prize. And I also was a few seconds away from being photobombed by my youngest son, who's there on the left. So how did I get there? From this point, from, you know, writing that first paragraph to winning the Penguin Literary Prize? You know, well, obviously it's lots of things, a lot of it's luck, but I like to think there are 2 main factors. One is that I submitted my work everywhere. I wrote it, and I stood by it, and I sent it out, and I kept on sending it out no matter how many rejections I got. This is a screenshot of my submission spreadsheet. It's probably about a third to a half of it, so you're not seeing the full thing. Every time I submitted to a prize or a competition or to a publisher or to a literary agent, it went into this spreadsheet so I could sort of, you know, track the results, you know, announcement or decision dates, and upcoming opportunities. If you look down the left, the grey represents all the times that I had rejection. The yellow is when I received sort of some positive feedback or got longlisted or shortlisted, and the greens were things that I considered to be a success. Eventually what I did was I actually filtered out all of the unsuccessful things and just saw where I'd had wins and what was coming up were the future opportunities, just to keep myself focused and not wallow in all of that rejection. But I think it's really worth, you know, for any aspiring writers out there, it's worth remembering that behind every success is so much rejection. So yeah, keep going, keep putting your work out there. I think the other factor is that I managed to find my writing community. At the beginning of 2014, I saw that Footscray Community Arts Centre had done a call out for participants in a new program they were starting called the West Writers Group. So I put in an expression of interest and then was thrilled when I was accepted. At first it was a really big group, and slowly over time it sort of whittled down to a sort of a core group, most of whom are pictured here. It ran formally for 2 years, but the relationships that were formed in that time remain to this day. I'm still in reasonably regular contact with a lot of the members, and we still exchange work and still talk about writing. So, you know, that's been really helpful in getting me started and really kind of rolling with my novel writing. And it also gave me other opportunities. So here I am reading some of my work out loud at an event for the Emerging Writers Festival. It's kind of nervous. And here I am, even more nervous, facilitating a panel discussion with Christos Cholkas, Amra Pajalic, and Omar Musa, 3 wonderful writers, and then me. But what a wonderful opportunity to speak to those writers. And so the program in 2020 has been on hold because of COVID-19. You may have heard of it. But I would really recommend that anyone who lives or works or has any established links with the West consider, you know, applying in the future. Go to the Footscray Community Arts Centre website and check out the details. And no, I'm not being paid for this announcement. So then in terms of my writing community, I also, through study, I did a 5-day sort of masterclass, and as a result, we had sort of spin-off series, a writing group formed, and we called ourselves the Prologues, because we like to think it was the prologue of our writing careers. These writers have been so important to me. We've met monthly now for almost 4 years. We're all fiction writers. We all write novels, very different novels, but we are each other's biggest cheerleaders. And I think that's really important, because writing is a very solo sport. That you really need to have those cheerleaders to sort of like commiserate with you when you're down, and sort of like, you know, and celebrate with. Obviously with Lucozade in wine glass, it looks like we're drinking there. Who knows? Anyway, so finding my tribe of writers, and I have lots of other writer friends, but I won't bore you with all of the stories, but it's really, I think it really helps to be connected to other writers and have those conversations and those touch points. So then we come to me winning the Penguin Literary Prize. A lot of people ask me, what were you doing when you found out? And the answer was not much. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was putting together a shopping list on my phone while my stepdaughter was explaining the plot of The Shining to her younger sister next to me. And I got this email from Meredith Curnow at Penguin Random House Australia, and I started reading it before I realised this is the email I've been waiting for. And it was very coy. It's like, dear Imbi, how do you feel about winning the Penguin Literary Prize? And I gasped so loudly when I realised I'd won that my stepdaughter thought she just spoiled the ending of The Shining for me. She hadn't. And the answer to Meredith's question was, I felt really, really, really good about winning the Penguin Literary Prize. And in fact, we went out for lunch. We forgot about doing the food shopping. We went out for lunch to celebrate, and at one point I went to the bathroom, too much information, but I saw my reflection for the first time since I'd won the prize, and I had to take a photo because I just wanted to bottle that feeling. And that's the face of someone who's just found out that she's finally going to get published. So I had to sit on that feeling for a couple of weeks, and then they flew me to Adelaide. I remember flying, and I accepted the prize at the Leading Edge Book Conference. Now, I had thought that I was just going to stand on the stage and kind of wave, but as we entered the room, Meredith, who I'd just met and was trying to impress, said, oh, would you like to make a few comments? And I was like, oh. I mean, you know, as a writer, I like to write everything, so I didn't have a chance to write anything, but I looked around the room and I saw all these booksellers, and I thought, this is where it begins. This is where I transitioned from being a writer to being an author. So I said, yes, of course. And I got up on stage and I spoke for like 17 hours, although I've been told it was only a couple of minutes. I cannot remember what I said, but I do remember that I ended the whole thing by waving cheerfully at the room and saying, it's nice to meet you all, in that tone of voice. And then my biggest mistake, other than that, was telling my kids that I did that, and they tease me about it all the time. They will never let me forget it. So then what happened next? My winning manuscript entered a long and rigorous editorial process, which I won't bore you with the details of that now. But we're going to cut to April of this year, where, you know, I'm at a stage where I'm thinking that maybe my book, which is due to come out in July, is not going to come out because the paper is going to be used to make toilet paper instead. And I receive a box, and I unwrap and open the box, and then this is what happened.
What's up there, Imbi? Like Back to the Future. Hey George, this just arrived. What is it? It's for you, Mr. McFly. It's for you, Mr. McFly. It's for you. What is it? What is it?
So that's what it's like to be almost 50 and be holding your very first published book for the very first time. Such a good feeling. So then here we are, where we've got the spill. It's a book. What is it about? Well, actually, no, people don't ask me that first. They ask me, does it come with a complimentary cup of tea? And once we push past the inevitable disappointment that it doesn't, then they say, well, what is it about? It's really hard to say in one sentence or two what a whole book is about, but I usually fall back on the elevator pitch, which I used as part of my submission for the prize, which is, no two people ever experience or remember the same thing in the same way, especially when they're sisters. So at its heart, the book is about two sisters, Nicole and Samantha, who are ostensibly estranged. Their mother has just passed away and they're further away from each other than they've ever been. And it's about how they start to uncover some secrets from their parents and from their past, and how they start to come back together. People also like to ask me what inspired the book. And I find that a very hard question, because, you know, a book is like the most complicated recipe you will ever make. It's really hard to choose what the star ingredient is. But if I had to, I would say it'd be the car accident I was in when I was 10. And so what happened was we'd flipped the car on our way to from Melbourne to Newcastle, and while we were waiting for the ambulance, I remember looking over at the car and thinking, yeah, it looks fine, we'll be able to drive that home. And then later when I saw it again, I realised it'd been totaled. And I always sort of thought that was kind of a metaphor for what the car accident or the impact it had on me as a person, because while I ostensibly was fine, I had a couple of cuts and I got a couple of stitches near my eyebrow, I was very different from them. It really changed who I was. So I kind of took that memory and started to sort of fictionalize it. I put two fictitious sisters in the car accident and their mother, and I started to ask questions like, where have they come from? Where are they going? Why did the car crash? What happens next? And through that, started to explore the pivotal moments, small and large, in these two sisters' lives that helped shape who they were or who they had become. So that's kind of the heart of the story. So the three kind of main themes, obviously sisters is a big thing. That's relationship between sisters. I always find the most fascinating of all family dynamics, and I've been collecting stories from friends. I have two sisters of my own. All of the kind of miscommunication, misunderstandings, resentment, jealousy, and yet kind of this fierce loyalty and like great love between sisters. It just makes for such great material. Then there's also memory. I'm fascinated by the gap that there is between how people tend to experience things and then how they remember or choose to remember it over time. I think we all fictionalize our memories to some degree or another. And yeah, so I'm always really interested in that gap. And then again, the gap between what I remember and what you remember, even though we were both there at the same time. And then the third theme is alcoholism, which is not something that I set out to write about. It's a kind of not a very jolly topic, but I just was really interested in exploring through the various characters the different kind of relationships people have with alcohol. And some people it's entirely problematic and devastating, and for other people they have a much more easy relationship with the bottle. So that was sort of something that I ended up exploring. And finally, the way that I kind of chose to tell the story was not in a kind of a linear start with the car accident and then slowly move to the present day. I kind of wanted just to treat the whole book like a jigsaw puzzle, where I would give the reader bits of the puzzle from different parts, and then slowly over time they would be able to build a picture of what had actually happened to these two sisters in their lives. So that's all I have to say with my presentation. But wait, there's more. So now I'd like to answer the questions that Pathy Raj has sent through to me, which you might remember from earlier on in the presentation if you were paying attention. These were great questions. Thanks so much. The first question is, the book is about how no two people share the same memory of an event. After writing The Spill, do you find you think differently about memory? And has it affected how you talk with people about shared experiences? It's a really good question. And I think, look, one of the earlier bits of feedback I got from the first draft of the book was that maybe I should not jump around, you know, back and forward from the present to the past, but maybe set it all in the present with sort of flashbacks to the past. And I didn't want to do that because I really felt that if you're flashing back from the present, you're only remembering what you can remember now, not actually what happened. I know from my own experiences, my memory gets fuzzier. My memories are highly fictionalized, and I'm a very unreliable narrator of my own life. So I really wanted to highlight that gap between the experience and the memory. In terms of how I talk with people about shared memories, I do feel like I'm much more careful now that I've written this book. I mean, there's a key sort of like family in-joke about Pritikin scones. If anyone remembers the Pritikin diet, they will know that there's no fun to be had in the Pritikin diet. But it's a very funny haha joke for some of the family members, but for Samantha, one of the sisters, it's actually a trigger, like of a very painful memory. So, you know, often with those sort of family stories that we tell, it's sometimes worth revisiting those and re-examining or considering them from someone else's perspective. So yeah, I guess I'm a little bit more sort of careful or sensitive in the way that I approach those shared memories or shared experiences. Were there any other books or characters that inspired you when you were writing Samantha, Nicole, and Tina? I'd say no. I didn't really base them on any characters per se, although it's sort of like visually I always imagined Claudia Carvin as Nicole. I hadn't ever really got around to casting Samantha in my mind, but I mean, to be completely honest, both sisters are based on me. I mean, paging Dr. Narcissus, but you know, you saw those journals. I, you know, spent years writing about myself, so why would my fiction be any different? But no, I did actually take the two ways in which I felt I was fundamentally affected by that car accident from my childhood and kind of, you know, use that as the basis for both those two sisters. And as for Tina, she's just like a composite of all the larger than life women that I've ever met. She was such fun to write, and I hope anyone who reads the book finds her fun to read. So the next question is, could you share a couple of tips for turning personal stories or histories into fictional forms on the page? Where and how might you start? Yeah, I mean, it is you do need to be very careful when you take events from your own life or from the lives of other people around you, because you need to consider, is this my story to tell? And if it isn't my story to tell, then do I have permission to tell it? So even when things get fictionalized, it's, you know, it's the essence of that experience will still be there in the words. And though having said that, you know, people will read things and they will miss the things that are actually based on them, and will read other things and think that was them, and which was not intended. So you can't ever guarantee how someone's going to read the final product. But I guess the thing that you need to be mindful of is other people's feelings. So it's always best to kind of ask first, rather than beg forgiveness later when the book is already a book and out there. And so the final question is, are there any interesting books you're listening to or reading? It's a very personal question, but actually one I'm very happy to answer. Under lockdown, I have ended up reading much more than I ever read, or have read for years. I kind of, having small children got me out of the habit. So I've been thrilled to kind of really return to reading, and there've been these little windows that I've been peering through into other lives while I've been stuck in my house. So, so important. So I've been mainly focusing on Australian books that have come out in 2020, sort of more specifically sort of debut books, because it's been a really rubbish year to have your first book out in the world as an unknown author. So I've been trying to support my fellow debut writers. So, you know, more specifically, read Kokomo by Victoria Hannon, The Safe Place by Anna Downs, No Small Shame by Christine Bell, Marg Hickey's Rural Dreams, it's a collection of short stories, and Paul Delgano's Polly. And it's not a debut, but it's new, a couple of months out now, and that's The Mother Fault by Kate Milden Hall. All wonderful books and kind of completely transporting me off to places other than here. Yeah, so I would really recommend, if your library is open now and you're able to go and borrow some of these books that have come out this year, or go into your local bookseller, need your business, be very happy to see you and recommend any one of many beautiful and wonderful books that have come out from Australian writers this year. So support Australian writers, support Australian bookshops, support Australian libraries, and thank you, Brimbank Libraries, for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to chat, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks.